First book of February down, and it was not a winner. The basic premise is that you have a woman who wants to be a writer. She's in her early 20s. She is pretty immature, but Lucy Adams, she writes a pretty cute character. She's likable. She just really wants to fall in love, but she ends up going on dating apps and having one-night stands. She writes about one of them in a humorous way, and starts to get some popularity on a self-publishing site where she can publish a book chapter by chapter as she writes it, and she gets a bunch of followers, and so she starts to think, I need more chapters, I need more material, so I will purposefully find people who I think will be awful experiences and mock them and write about them, lure them on a date, and make fun of them for chapters, for material for my book. And I just wasn't on board with this in so many ways. She keeps putting herself in harm's way. She is mocking herself, depreciating herself, all in the name of what is called feminism, which is not what feminism is. And I just didn't like this book on so many levels. So the first book of February, not a win. Let's hope the rest of them are grand. I have not kept up with checking in about each book as I have read it at all this month. But I have a huge chunk of books to talk to you about now. So I finished Sophie Kinsella's The Undomestic Goddess. So this was a reread for me, and this is one of the Sophie Kinsellas I've reread the most that's not part of her Shopaholic series. The standalones, I haven't really reread most of them. I've read them once, and so that's why I'm doing this project this year, rereading all of Sophie Kinsella's standalones, because I have listened to especially the first 4 books and the Christmas one of Shopaholic. But like I just said, most of these standalones I've only read once. The Undomestic Goddess is an exception to that. I have read The Undomestic Goddess. I think this was my 4th time, and it is definitely one of my favorites. I enjoy the character. What is her name? Samantha Sweeting. So Samantha Sweeting is a high-powered attorney, and she's given her whole life to this. She has a lot of pressure on her from her, I think, judge or very high-power attorney mother, and her brother is also very business driven, and there's just a lot of expectation that she will do well, and she is about to make a partner at this really big law firm in London, only to discover that she made a huge mistake that she does not remember making, that has cost the company, that has cost a client of the company millions of dollars. And she kind of panics, gets on a train through a series of events, accidentally gets hired to be the housekeeper for a kind of upper middle class family that thinks they're really important people. They are very condescending to her. They treat her terribly, but to be fair, they don't treat her terribly. Let me backtrack. They don't treat her terribly, but because they are so in their own heads and so centered on themselves, they end up treating her terribly with good intentions. She, for her part, has no idea how to cook, how to clean, how to sew, how to do anything. And she has accidentally sold herself as just the greatest housekeeper ever, who happens to just go from she has a friend who has a title, and so that friend gives her a recommendation, a reference, and so the couple believes that they've just snagged the former housekeeper of a titled person, and that this woman has run these super important big country manor homes and estates, and that she has been in charge of throwing large London parties and events and things like that, and she doesn't even cook her own food. So it's hilarious, and there is of course a love story, and I just really, really, really enjoy it. It's not the greatest writing in the world. There's even some things that haven't aged well over the years, but still it is one of my favorite stories. It's really, really wonderful. Then I quietly finished Marking Time by Elizabeth Jane Howard. This is the second book in the Cazalet Chronicles, and I'm excited to read the third book. I am taking a break from it in March to make room for the stampede of middle grade March books that ran into my life that I want to finish. And I won't say much about it since it is the second, but I am really loving the Cazalet Chronicles books, and I thought that I would. I knew that I would. I just instinctively knew that I would love them, and I highly recommend them, but I can't really tell you much about them as we march forward. So look into them. It's the Cazalet Chronicles by Elizabeth Jane Howard. There are 5 books in the series, and if you like 1930s, 1940s family drama, with really beautiful writing and depth, multiple perspectives, it's really, really fabulous. I gulped, I consumed, I devoured The Lily of Ludgate Hill. I read it in one day. I just cannot get over how much I love this series. The second in the series is my favorite, The Belle of Belgrave Square, but Lily of Ludgate Hill is definitely my second favorite. Siren of Sussex was not my favorite, but maybe I just need to go back and reread it. I'm glad that I read Belle of Belgrave Square because I just really loved it. And I kind of thought this was a 3-book series, but it's not. And there is a sneak peek at the end. The last chapter here the last chunk here is a sneak peek of the next in series. And I am so excited because we're introduced to the character of the next book in this book. That is true of all of them, but we're introduced to that character. And as she was introduced, I immediately wanted to know her story. She is so interesting. So I'm really looking forward to the next one. I think it comes out this year, November, at the end of this year, I think. If you aren't reading Mimi Matthews and you like romance or the Victorian era or horses, hi Lola, or great storytelling, or if you like the classics, because all of these kind of spin on stories that you will have that feel familiar, but that are very, very unique. You will love these books. So highly, highly recommend. I reread, but it felt like a first time read, A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray, and immediately ordered the second and third. I wanted to read this series this year, but I hadn't fully committed because I have, for a very long time, decided that I do not enjoy YA anymore. And Witchaven just destroyed that self-conception. So I picked up Libba Bray's A Great and Terrible Beauty again after 10 years. Like, I think I read it about a decade ago, and maybe a little bit, maybe like 8 years ago. I remember enjoying it, but was not compelled to pick up the second and third book in the series. So I went back into it, and it is about a girl who has been raised, a British girl who's been raised in India, whose mother dies, so she's sent to boarding school in England. She gets involved in a seance type activity, finds an old book with some friends. They don't start out as friends, they kind of start out as rivals, but they become very close friends. They need to solve a mystery and figure out their own powers and stop evil. And it plays with the lines between life and death. It's just really, it's fantastical, but also very Victorian and also really focused on character development. It's very, very well done. I'm not doing it justice right now. I'm just remembering the feelings of it. And I felt great intensity, great worry and fear, great curiosity, great shock and awe. The end, there's not a resolution because we're following part of a story straight into the second book. But the wrap up for this particular story felt a little YA. I don't know how else to say it. A little unsatisfying, a little too simple. So are you trying to tell me that you'd really like me to stop looking at the camera? Excuse me? Lola? Lola, can you come down, please? Can you please come down? Down. Down. Thank you. She's got messages for me. The main message is, look at me, look at me, look at me. You silly goose. Okay, so what was I saying? Oh, it felt too simple. The ending felt too simple. Maybe she disagreed. Maybe she thought the ending was fantabulous and that's why she was trying to cut me off here. Or maybe she was demonstrating. I know. Lola was demonstrating. She's so smart. She's such a literary beagle. She was demonstrating for us the divide between life and death that I had just mentioned. I've trained her well. From there, I took a little breather because that had been such an intense read for me. Took a little breather and I read the latest collection of printed poems by Kae Tempest. This is divisible by itself and one, and it is just what I said. It is a collection of poems. I always enjoy Kae Tempest's poetry. You are looking for a poet that is kind of timeless, that kind of speaks to the spiritual and the philosophical in the physical. I highly recommend that you pick up Kae Tempest. Then I read another YA. I actually read both books in this duology this month. I read Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and I luxuriated in this book. The depiction and the way that the magical realism is worked into this story, it feels like it is the 1910s, but in a not steampunky way. There is otherness about it, a magic about it. It is the story of some hibernating gods that everyone thought were gone. So imagine if Zeus suddenly came alive and was physically present on the earth today. It's that kind of a feeling. Like, these are beings that have been talked about, maybe even worshipped, but not unbelieved in, but they were not part of reality. And suddenly they're alive and they've got a bone to pick with each other. One is a female, one is a male, and there's history there. So they go to war in an effort to resolve that history. And they pull all the mortals into it, and the mortals don't necessarily have a choice. And when this story focuses in on a couple of very specific individuals, the relationships they have with each other. One is a brother and sister. The brother barely features in this one. His presence is there. His presence is an instigator for, there's a leaf blower. So I may need to take a break and come back later. Let me try and finish this one. I'm gonna take a break and come back later and finish it. All right, we're back for round two. Actually went and got some Starbucks, and leaf blowers should be done. I did see them still around the facilities, and sometimes they do come back around. I know I was talking about Divine Rivals, but I don't remember what I was saying. So we will just say I absolutely love this. There was something so special about the writing. I just really, really enjoyed this a lot. And once again, had to take a chip out of my I don't like YA. I still don't think that I am just a YA reader, but I think there are higher quality writing YA coming out than we've seen for the past decade or so. Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Everybody should pick this book up. It's so good. I then read Bean's Big Book Bash Pick. It was a small month. Next month it will be a chunker, and then the month after that will be another small one. If you want to know more about Bean's Big Book Bash this year, I'll link the announcement video below. But we have The Lover by Marguerite Duras, and I did not love this. I did not love The Lover. The two things that I think it has going for it are beautiful, atmospheric, sultry kind of writing, really decadent kind of writing, and yet still simple, and then also that it does not make judgment upon the actions of either person. Not either person, of any of the people involved in this story. Basically, it's kind of autobiographical. It's a fictionalized autobiographical retelling of an event in Duras, or a time in Duras's life. It takes place in Saigon as French rule there is kind of coming to a close. Colonization is coming to a close. She's a French girl. She is 15 years old, and she's going to a boarding school. She hates her home life. She's got a kind of spoiled, aggressive older brother who is addicted to opium, and she's got a sweet, too gentle, beat up upon younger brother who she loves very much, and she's got a mother who's overwhelmed and doesn't know how to raise her children and survive, make a way for them to survive in Saigon. They're going to have to return to France, where life will be just as hard, if not harder, for them. I mean, financially, relationally, idealistically, in all the ways. So she is in a boarding school, and she prefers to be at the boarding school. She's got some friendships there. And on this particular occasion, she, on the way back to school from a vacation, meets 38-year-old Chinese man. And the Chinese are kind of taking the place of the French as the colonizers at that time. And so they are wealthy and looked down upon, whereas the French had been wealthy and looked down upon everyone else. Now the French are being ousted and the Chinese are kind of taking their place. It's a little bit of a Romeo and Juliet sort of a story, in that these are two people who on no account should be together. He is vastly older. She is a young girl. She is an adolescent child. And they come from two kind of opposing cultures and socioeconomic standpoints and social standings. Neither of their families will accept the other. And they form a relationship, which, as told through Marguerite Duras, is really instigated or pushed to the next level by the main character. What is her name? Maybe she didn't have a name. I don't know if she had a name. It is told in the first person. So maybe the name is Marguerite. I don't know. Did not love this. Not ever going to read it again. Not really feeling like it will influence positively my understanding of other texts or anything. It felt very self-indulgent and sad. Self-indulgent and sad. Not my go-to cup of tea. So I followed it up with another classic, which is neither self-indulgent nor sad. And that was my reread of Tolkien's The Hobbit. And it did not disappoint in my reread. I loved it again. I really enjoyed this. If you've never read The Hobbit, I do strongly suggest you pick it up. It is a folktale kind of fantasy. And it's for the meek who know they have a lion in them. Just really love this. I was then blown away by Kristin Hannah's The Women. Now, Kristin Hannah and I don't always get along. I haven't read a lot of her books. This was my fourth that I've read. I read one a long time ago before Kristin Hannah was a big thing. I read one about sisters, and it was just not good. It was just not good. Hello. I had to cut off because this little one needed to go OUT. So took care of that, and now we are back, and I'm just gonna start here as if I didn't say anything, because I don't remember what I said or if I said anything. I may not have even said anything. Kristin Hannah, The Women. I really enjoyed this. I've seen some people talk about how they did not enjoy it because it is not a feel-good female friendship at war kind of book. It's not what they thought it would be. That is also what I thought it would be, and that it was a relief to me that it was not actually that at all. The title, The the women is not an indication of reading about a tight-knit group of women at war. Although that is present, it's really the story of one woman and her as representing all the women that have gone to war that nobody knows about, that nobody thinks about, that nobody acknowledges. And then that in turn is about all the people who have gone to war who received no acknowledgement or even just plain out rejection. When she comes back from Vietnam, she comes back at the time in the moment where the States have started to lose the war and people are starting to hate the soldiers that were there. She comes back as a nurse. She had gone as a nurse with the army, and she comes back into complete rejection from not only her family, but society. And they just don't want to hear about it. They just don't want to know about it. I've never been to war, but that doesn't mean I don't have a true war story. We all have true war stories. One of my very favorite books, The Things They Carry by Tim O'Brien, dovetails so nicely with this story. This is a true war story. We all have them. I've never been to war, but I have experienced culture shock, the even harder thing to experience, reverse culture shock. And she comes back into both. So with culture shock, you're kind of anticipating that things will be different and you will feel uncomfortable and you will not understand, and you go in prepared for that, but then it still hits you because it's really hard to work through. Reverse culture shock is when you come back to a place you've been before and things are different and you don't understand them, but you're not mentally prepared for that because you have this vision of who you were in that space and what that space was in that time. And none of those things are the same. And it hits you doubly hard. So she comes back with both of those feelings. She comes back knowing things will be different because she is different, and also anticipating that something about it will be more than familiar. And she has to deal with both culture shock and reverse culture shock at the same time, as well as undiagnosed, unidentified, unaccepted PTSD, especially for the women. And she's told constantly when she gets back, women didn't go to Vietnam. There are no women in Vietnam. That's the end of the story. That's the end of the story that people have. You didn't go to Vietnam. Women aren't in Vietnam. You didn't go to war. You were a nurse on the front lines, on the battlefield, dealing with the after effects of napalm, dealing with the soldiers who are fighting for their lives, fighting for the lives of soldiers. You didn't go to war. So when she gets back, no one will hear her, no one will help her. Except for the couple of nurse friends that she made who are there for each other. But that's not what it's about. It's about the women who weren't in Vietnam, the women who didn't go to war, the women who have never gone to war. Women don't go to war. And so it's really about the ignored pain, the inconvenient pain, the rejection of, the isolation of anyone who's ever gone through something and come out of it to find themselves completely alone. And I won't tell you the rest of why it's called The Women, but there's a really uplifting point, which is what maybe makes it not a true war story. Because if you go by Tim O'Brien's rules, true war stories don't necessarily have morals or a happy ending. If it does, it's not a true war story. But it's a Kristin Hannah. So of course there's going to be some kind of redemptive quality in the end for all that pain and struggle. And I do think that it's done in such a way that it maintains its true war story status. The whole time I was reading it, I was thinking of Tim O'Brien's book. There are so many things. Kristin Hannah at the end gives a list of like the books that influenced her, and she doesn't mention the things they carried at all, and yet there are some things in here that are almost word for word the same. And I'm not saying Kristin Hannah took them. I'm just saying that's how real and true they are. That's how grounded the ideas and the concepts around this concept of the true war story are. If you've never read The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, I highly suggest you do, but with this caveat, you need to read it at least 3 times in a row. Yeah, you're going to hate it the first time you read it. You are. You're going to hate it the first time you read it. The second time you read it, you're going to go, oh, there's more here than I think. And the third time you're going to go, oh, I get it. Oh, I get it. I get it. I get it. So strongly recommend that you read The Things That Carried by Tim O'Brien 3 times in a row. And also pick up The Women. You don't have to read The Things They Carried to enjoy The Women. This is a heartbreaking account of the breaking of a woman so that she can be rebuilt, so that she can rebuild herself. It's very well done. It's very well done. Kristen and Hannah and I, oh, that's what I was talking about before I left. Yeah, we don't necessarily always get along. I read The Great Alone last year and loved it. Still think about it. Love The Great Alone. Before that, I had read Comfort and Joy, which was not really for me. And a long time ago, I read a book about 2 sisters. I don't remember what it's called. It might have been called 2 Sisters. And it was terrible. It was truly terrible. It was a terrible book. I did not enjoy it at all. But The Women is a winner. I followed that up with Who Am I? Who Am I? Another YA. And I loved it. I loved it. I'm reading the second part. This is a duology. I'm reading the second part right now. Anatomy is an effortless read. It is set in Victorian Edinburgh, and it is about a young woman who wants to study medicine, and she's having a hard time being accepted into that world. It is also about a young man who is a gravedigger. He gets bodies for the university and for medical students so that they can perform autopsies. And there's also a fever, an illness going through Edinburgh that is killing and maiming many, many people. And she ends up opening a clinic in her home, and with the help of this gravedigger who has, although he handles all of these bodies that are supposedly killed by this fever, he's never caught this fever himself. And they're trying to figure out what about him and his makeup, or maybe his diet or his habits, keep him from catching it. And she starts to treat these people with this special kind of herb that he drinks and makes a tea from. She contacts this prestigious doctor saying, could we do inoculations with the scabs of these people? That's gross, but it's what she does. Can we do inoculations with the scabs of these people who are taking this medication? They're taking it internally and externally. She creates like a salve and they drink it, and it seems to really help them. And he just summarily dismisses her and says, like, you're being dangerous and stop it. And this is when things start to get interesting. And that's all I'll say. That's all I'll say. There's other things going on in Edinburgh, and they're pretty sinister. And it was a really fun read. It was a really fun read, and I'm thoroughly enjoying the second book as well. It is not letting me down. Unlike another YA book I read. I read the second book. I love Divine Rivals so much that I just picked up Ruthless Vows right away and did not enjoy it. It was okay. I'm glad I read it because I needed to know what would happen. This one really heavily features the brother character, and part of why I loved Divine Rivals so much was that I was so entirely invested in that romance. And there's something that has happened that keeps them apart in a weird way in the second book. And so I understand that from a storytelling point of view, but it was not done in a satisfying or compelling way. And I just really didn't care about the parts about the brother. I know it was meant to be an edgy addition, a bit more conflict, different kind of conflict than the first one, but it just didn't ring true for me. It felt really, it was boring. It felt boring. It really did. And I did not really enjoy it. So Divine Rivals, really love. Ruthless Vows, you kind of have to read it so you know what happens. So I'm not recommending it, but it was not the stronger of the two books for me anyway. It could be that there are some people who would much more enjoy the story that's going on in Ruthless Vows than they do Divine Rivals, but I was not that reader. Divine Rivals was something really special. Ruthless Vows was just necessary. Not great. Not great. This took me a long time, but I finished it next. I finished it after I finished Ruthless Vows. This was The Letters of Abelard and Heloise. Oh, these two. Oh, Abelard and Heloise. So Abelard is kind of a jerk. These are two people who lived in the 11th century, 12th century, in the 12th century. They lived in the 1100s, so it's the 12th century. They lived in the 12th century. These are real people. They've maybe been mythologized by this point. It's been a lot of years. But we do have their writings. We have their letters that they wrote to many different people. And we've actually lost a lot of the letters that Abelard and Heloise wrote to each other, but we do have some after the main events. So Abelard was this like really popular religious teacher, philosopher, super popular, loved by all, really smart, and very full of himself. Very, very, very full of himself. He's an egoist. He really is. Heloise was known through all the land. This takes place in France. She's known through all the land. She's this young girl, and she has learned all the things that the convent school can teach her and more. She is raised by her uncle and the convent school. And the uncle really values her education. It's very apparent that she's incredibly intelligent, and he nurtures that. He finds ways to nurture that. Well, she's beautiful and young and smart. She's going to be a great catch. Abelard hears of her and he's like, oh my goodness, she may be the only woman who's equal to my greatness. He seeks her out. He makes a plan. In a letter that he writes about his own trials and tribulations, he lays this out for us. That he makes the plan that he will ingratiate himself with the uncle and be hired as her tutor and turn her into his lover. Very hard to like Abelard throughout this whole thing. It's very hard to like Abelard. It's very easy to love Heloise and to feel for her, and it is very hard to like Abelard. So he's successful in this endeavor, and for about 18 months, they are together. He wants to marry her, and she's like, what will marriage do? It won't change anything, and it will basically enslave me to you, and I'm already emotionally committed to being your servant. And they have a child, and they name him Astrolabe. You know, like a astronomical measuring tool. Astrolabe. We don't know what happens to Astrolabe. I looked and looked. I couldn't find anything. He is raised by Abelard's sister, and he does become a monk. We know he becomes a monk at some point. But we don't really know anything about him. I just feel like these are two hippies. They're two 1100s hippies. They do get married because he's really pushing it, and she and he have about 18 months together. When stolen months, really, because her family, her uncle, didn't want them to be together. At one point, a family member of his breaks into his bedroom in the middle of the night and castrates him as a punishment for having married Heloise. So his family didn't really support it either, but we know more about her family. And he feels shame and terror and panic, and he immediately goes to join a monastery. He goes to become a monk, and he relinquishes his marriage vows, but he'd already commanded Heloise to join a nunnery. And she did. Get thee to a nunnery. And she did. And she felt no calling. And she's always repeating and constantly saying, you know, I felt no calling to this. I feel no calling to this. She does so well that she rises up the ranks to become an abbess. And she's, of course, incredibly intelligent and smart and logical and committed, because she's doing this thing that Abelard told her to do. She has a written relationship. She's got connection with the Pope. She's big time. She's powerful. She becomes really powerful in this position that she does to please Abelard. And she's constantly wondering, did you ever really love me? If you loved me, why aren't this, and this happening? And constantly reaffirming how much she loved him, the way that she loved him, and what she would have given up for him, and what she does give up for him. And he is constantly at this point, from this point forward, referring to them as brothers and sisters in Christ. And then they die and they get buried next to each other. Not the love story I thought it was going to be. But it is what it is. It is what it is. I thoroughly enjoyed reading those letters. And getting to know Heloise. She was such a woman. So ahead of her time. If I believed in time slips, I would think she truly was from a different era. Amazing woman. This one took me a while to finish because I was just enjoying most of it. Like I would thoroughly enjoy large chunks of it. And then it would get into territory that I just kind of wasn't interested in. And that would slow me down because I just wasn't interested in that part of the story. And so it took me a while. Because either I was reading it slowly because I was savoring it, or I was reading it slowly because it was boring me. And it went kind of back and forth. But that was Wild Highland Home by Alexandra Raiff. And I'm very excited to read the 2 companion novels in this trilogy. All of them are somehow about women who go to live in the Highlands for one reason or another, and how that positively impacts their life. The parts about this that I love are the parts about the Highlands, the characters, the community, the small town, the way that the very simple Highland life and expectations on each other for goodness and support and community really positively impact the main character. I did not really like the main character. That was okay because I knew she was going to undergo a change, and she really does. But there are times in the beginning where I'm just like, and the bits about her London life are so 90s kind of dark, and like 1990s as far as like the choices that she's making and the priorities that she has. And then there are lots of moments in establishing her character and the change that she will undergo and the need for that change. There's like long flashback chapters that talk about past relationships and past things that she's done to hurt people and things that the people have done to hurt her. There's a little bit of that for the main love interest as well, but it wasn't as annoying as it was for the woman. Some of it doesn't age well, and that's fine. Just read it for what it is. The parts that are in the present tense are so wonderfully endearing that, yeah, it's well worth slogging through the past. I definitely would reread this book, but now that I have the knowledge of the past, I would just read the present day parts. And it would be such a delight to do that. Such a delight. Yeah, very excited to read the next 2 in that trilogy and possibly read more by that author. She has a really wonderful way of capturing place and really creating side characters that really carry the story. I am hopeful that the next main character who's moving to the Highlands, maybe I'll like her a little bit more than I liked, what was this woman's name? Claire Somerville. Then I read this one. I listened to it, was just a 4-hour listen. If you listen on 2 times speed, like I do most things, it was a 2-hour listen. And it was Wildling Hall, and by Elizabeth Hand. I think by Elizabeth Hand. I could be very wrong about that, but there's a picture of it right here, and so you can see. And this was a joy to listen to. It is a supernatural mystery. It's a ghost story about a folk band, a British folk band in the 1960s, that their community has experienced a death, a suicide. And they, in order to deal with that and also to try and recapture the kinds of inspiration that they used to have in making music, they rent an old kind of dilapidated manor house for the summer in the 60s. And they go out there, and their goal is to come together as a community and to record an album. And they do some sessions, some recording sessions, but it is apparent that there's a lot of things going on. Like some of them are dealing with being in the closet and not like their best friends, the people that they create with that know all their intimate thoughts and secrets, except that part of themselves. So that's a like big preoccupation and distraction for some of the characters. For some of the characters, it is the 60s, so it's drugs, and not wanting to face grief and not wanting to face maybe the end of this community, this band that may be imminent. And for some, it's relationships, trying to, again, avoid grief and the reality of the present moment by forming many relationships. So there's all of this turmoil and distraction going on. So they decide to quarantine themselves kind of in this manor house and deal with their stuff together. And things get weird really fast. And it's told to you through interviews and album reviews and the descriptions of photographs. I don't know if I had the physical book, if those photographs would actually be in the book, but it's written really well. You can envision what the photographs are, and it's creepy. It's not terrifying, but it's creepy. It's atmospheric. It is fast-paced, and listening to it was a great experience because it's a multi-character cast, and you've got these reporters who are recording these interviews with these people. So it's the future. All these events have already happened. Decades have passed. And those that survived this summer, there's a hint for you, those that survived this summer are all being interviewed about this mystery that occurs from this summer, which is the disappearance of one of their members. It's good. It was really good. It was very good. I would say this would be a great book to listen to with a group, maybe not small children, but with a group on a road trip. This would be a great a listen for a commute. This would be a great listen for a plane trip. It's just really distracting and engaging and enthralling from the very first moment. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And the length was perfect for what it is. It's short. It's kind of like, I assume that the book itself is a novella, but it was the perfect length for telling this story. The end point and the like woo at the end is perfect. I think this was a real win. It was a real win for a supernatural ghost story, and highly recommend. Highly recommend. I don't know about the reading experience of it. You would be reading interviews. So I think I really highly recommend the audiobook experience of Wildling Hall. I will think about it. I will think about this book for a long time, I think. Then I finished Bear With Me Now by Katie Shepherd. This book, I feel, is incredibly problematic in a lot of ways. What I liked about it, I really enjoyed the author's writing style. I really did. And I also think that she created two very likable main characters, even though they have a plethora of problems. They are very, very likable. What I did not like was these two characters together. I did not like the premise for how they get together. And I did not like the frequency and length of the open door scenes. Now, maybe you are all for the open door stuff. In that case, that is not a critique that you need to take. But I prefer to be able to either quickly skim over the graphic stuff or to not have it at all. I know that nowadays, most romances, the expectation is that it will be there in the book, and that is fine. I'm willing to do my thing to enjoy the story and not try to change society. But in this one, it just seemed gratuitous. Like, it just seemed like that's what you were there for. And I say that because the story itself is lacking. Which is a weird thing to say after having just said the character building is great. So the character building is great, but the plot is not. The whole relationship is built on lies that are never, like, they are addressed. Things come clear in the end, but it's never really, like, acknowledged that these kinds of things aren't good to lie about, and these kinds of reasons aren't good for starting a relationship. She is trying to save him. She literally believes that she is his sobriety coach when she starts a physical relationship with him. That's not okay. And he firmly believes that he is the only way she will be able to get a job she deserves, because she is very skilled, but which she, quote unquote, can't get on her own because she has adult undiagnosed dyslexia. Neither of these reasons are good reasons to be in a relationship with each other. They're not good times to be in a relationship with each other. They're not good motivations to be in a relationship with each other. And their whole relationship is built on these things. Now, I did say there were some lies involved. I won't tell you what those are, but there are lies. And the whole thing just felt incredibly unhealthy. Incredibly unhealthy. And I did not enjoy it. Even though I do really like this author's writing, and she does create very likable characters. Very likable. This was her debut novel, and I might give a second book a try by this author from the library to see if a different story told by this author might be more enjoyable for me. Because again, I think Katie Shepherd has a real warm and an inviting way of telling a story. And she creates characters that I find intriguing and likable. But that was a very unhealthy relationship. Very unhealthy. Incredibly unhealthy. So I think to counteract that, I picked up Irene Hannon, See Rose Lane. This is the second book in the Hope Harbor series, and I really enjoyed it. Each of these is a standalone romance. They all take place in Hope Harbor, so the surrounding cast is all the same. You will see people that you know from other books living their lives in the background. And it's always, like the two that I've read, it's been about somebody from the outside coming in to Hope Harbor. In this one, it was a guy who had been raised in Hope Harbor, and he had gone away to become, I think, a lawyer? An attorney. Yeah, Eric is his name. He'd gone away to become an attorney, and through some devastating events, he's lost his career. So he returns home to his father's house, the house he grew up in, to kind of like rebuild his foundations and figure out his next steps. And when he gets home, he finds out that his dad is actually turning their home into an Airbnb. No, sorry, to a bed and breakfast. Not an Airbnb, to a bed and breakfast. And so there's constant upheaval. His life is going through upheaval. Now his past is going through an upheaval, and his home is in upheaval. His surroundings, physical surroundings, are in upheaval. And he is constantly butting heads with the female foreman for the construction company, of course. Could there be a romance there? Only time will tell. It is delightful. I have a different, like in the first book, I did not like the way that a family treated their daughter in the name of religion. And in this one, I do not like the way some of the characters stop being in the story and turn and break the fourth wall and just stare down the reader and give you a sermon. That's bad writing. It's terrible storytelling. I wish the contemporary Christian authors would rely on story, not rhetoric. Jesus just gave us parables and walked on. He did not feel the need to stop and explain every bit of every story every time, most times. Trust story. If there is a Christian author or a budding Christian author out there listening right now, just trust your story to get your job done. It's enough, more than enough. Trust your story to get the job done. Tell your story well, and you will not need rhetoric. Story is more powerful than rhetoric. Story is more powerful than rhetoric. That is my soapbox. I will step down now. Overall, this was lovely. It was a lovely, gentle, at times humorous, not always frustrating read. And I'm not done with the series. I would love to read more in this series. I don't have any more physical copies, and I think I'm going to wait till I can get my hands on a couple of the next ones that are used. But I'm not done with the series. I can see myself reading the whole series. I'll see you in a second. Your time. A couple of days, my time. I need to do my wrap up, and I haven't even finished talking about the last few books that I read. I'm at work. I don't have the books with me, but I've made a list. I believe this is everything that I haven't talked about yet. So I finished reading Immortality, which is the second book in the duology paired with Anatomy, which I really, really loved. I loved the second book. Immortality, I don't remember if I've already talked about this one or not, but there's not much I can say about it. I know I've already gushed about Anatomy, so I'll scooch forward. Just know that Anatomy made it onto one of my favorite books of the month list. I then read Georgiana. Oh, what an amazing biography. This also is one of my favorite reads of the month. It may be one of my favorite reads of the year. We'll have to see. It's so well written. It is so heartbreaking. It is very much the story of a young woman who was incredibly loved by her family. Coffee moment, hot chocolate moment. Incredibly loved by her family and brought up to be kind and generous and selfless. Also, though, to have like a sense of who she was in society and yet really protected from society at the same time. And so when a match is made for her, and she gets this like Darcy type character to marry. He's the Darcy without the hidden good side. He's not a bad man, but he is just from a very different idea of what is acceptable and what is right for his role in society. And he thinks that he is marrying kind of a business partner. It's her job to be his wife. She's going to bear the children and run the estate and not be loved, basically. He's got other women for that. She's not prepared for that, really. She's not prepared for the kind of cruelty and mean streaks in people, mean motivations, negative motivations that people might have, the way people might use her. She's incredibly intelligent, incredibly smart, incredibly kind-hearted, incredibly hopeful, incredibly naive, and she's thrown to the vipers. And she has no outlet for her intelligence, no appropriate outlet. She gets involved in politics. This leads her to both celebrity and scandal. She has affairs. She gets a very crazy gambling problem and spending problem to the point where she's in debt the equivalent of millions and millions of dollars. She just doesn't know how to navigate this life that she has been thrown into, and she doesn't have the support or the tools. And it's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. And yet at the same time, she's also this kind and generous and loving person who is, in the name of social norms, really thrown under several buses. I really enjoyed this book, the way that it's written, learning about this woman, feeling for her. She's portrayed in a way that makes you feel empathy, but also makes you realize, like, she's not perfect. So loved that. Yeah, super interesting. Very fast wrap up here, but yeah, I gotta get this out, and I'm out of time. So now I gotta get back to work. Bye.